The room was dark enough to make the air feel heavy, shadows swallowing the corners like they didn't want to be seen. A single strip of pale blue light traced the edge of the floor, the only illumination, humming faintly from a buried conduit. She stepped inside, her long coat brushing her legs, the faint scent of something electric and alien clinging to her like a warning. The click of the lock was soft but final, the kind of sound that told you there was no easy way back. Eyes caught his in the dimness, twin pools of molten gold that reflected the tiny light with an almost predatory shimmer. She moved closer, the floor cold under her bare feet, her voice so low it felt like it was sliding against his skin rather than reaching his ears. No cameras, no witnesses. The words carried weight, not just secrecy, they carried intent. Could feel the pulse in his throat quicken, not from the heat of her nearness, but from the unspoken reality settling in. This wasn't a meeting. It was a moment being carved out of time, hidden from everything and everyone. Whatever was about to happen would never make it into any report, never show up in any surveillance feed. It was the kind of moment people disappeared over. Her fingers brushed his wrist, and for an instant it felt intimate. Then the shift, the subtle tightening of her grip, the faint trace of something metallic against his skin. Not a caress, a test. She was searching for something, maybe a weapon, maybe a weakness. She didn't find either, and that seemed to disappoint her. "You're human," she murmured, almost to herself. Not an observation, a measurement. The way she said it made it sound like a liability, a rare commodity, and a dare all at once. He had heard about her kind, that hearing was one thing. Being in the same space, breathing the same air, was something else entirely. Sherilyn weren't supposed to be on this station. They were outlawed, banned, hunted even, but there she was, flesh and shadow, beautiful in the way of collapsing. Star was beautiful, dangerous in every spectrum. The log hummed again, and he realized she'd engaged more than just the door. This place was sealed, shielding activated, signal dampened. The world outside could not hear a thing. She was smiling now, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was a smile that hinted at the possibility of ending him or elevating him beyond anything he'd ever known. Her coat slid from her shoulders, pooling on the floor. Beneath it, strange lines ran across her skin, not tattoos, but patterns alive with faint bioluminescence, mapping her body like star charts etched in flesh. They pulsed in rhythm with her breathing, slow and steady. He had heard stories about what those lines could do, about how they weren't just decoration, but part of something far more lethal. "You have something," she said. It wasn't a question. She stepped closer, so close he could see faint motes of light drifting lazily within her eyes. "And I'm going to take it." Every instinct told him to push back, to demand answers, to fight if needed. But something deeper, something primal, urged him to stay still, because running wasn't an option anymore. This wasn't a game. This was a hunt, and somehow, without even knowing when it happened, he had become the prey. But humans weren't prey. Not really. Not for long. He felt the slow burn of defiance rise inside him, the familiar edge that came when someone tried to corner him. He didn't know what she wanted, but if she thought she could take it without a fight, she was wrong. His pulse slowed. His breathing steadied. The flicker in her eyes told him she noticed the shift and liked it. Somewhere outside these walls, the station spun in silence, hundreds of lives going about their business, oblivious to what was unfolding in this locked, shadowed room inside. It was just the two of them, no cameras, no witnesses, and only one of them would decide how this ended. The room seemed smaller now, the shadows pressed tighter around them, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. He could hear the faint hum of the lock seal still running in the background, a sound that meant they weren't just shut in, They were buried from the outside world. Even if someone knew this room existed, they wouldn't be able to find it now. She'd made sure of that dot. Her glowing lines shifted subtly, like threads of starlight pulled taut under her skin, brightening when she inhaled, dimming when she exhaled. The patterns almost hypnotized him, dragging his eyes along their paths. But every now and then they flickered irregularly, sharp, jagged pulses like the signal of a distant beacon. He had the feeling it wasn't an accident. She wanted him to watch. Her hand came up again, fingers brushing the side of his face, but there was nothing tender about it. She tilted his head slightly, studying him like she might study a weapon, noting the weight, the balance, the flaws. "Your kind hides things well," she said softly, "but you can't hide it from me." He didn't answer. He had nothing to give her, and even if he did, there was no way he'd hand it over just because she'd locked him in a dark room with her strange beauty and her quiet threats. Still, he could feel the pressure in her voice, not physical, but something deeper, something sliding through the cracks in his thoughts. Like she was knocking on doors in his mind, testing each one for weaknesses. It wasn't telepathy. Not exactly. More like she could taste the weight of his memories, feel the shape of his secrets without knowing the details. It made the hair at the back of his neck rise. If she pushed harder, she might find the thing she was looking for. And he knew exactly what she was looking for. The data core wasn't on him, at least not in the way she'd expect. She was hunting for something physical, something small enough to hide in a pocket or behind a panel, but that wasn't how humans worked when they were desperate. He burned the core into his own neural lattice, embedding it in the folds of memory so deep that it would take more than a surface scan to dig it out. It was risky, dangerous even, but the kind of gamble humans excelled at, and she didn't know it yet. The corner of his mouth twitched upward, a ghost of a smile. She caught it instantly, tilting her head with the curiosity of a predator seeing something unexpected in the prey's eyes. Her fingers moved from his jaw to his chest, pressing flat against him as if she could feel his heartbeat through the thin layer of his shirt. "You're not afraid," she said, "not of you." His voice was steady, and the way her eyes narrowed told him that was exactly the wrong answer, or the right one, depending on what game they were playing. The lines on her skin flared suddenly, bathing the room in a faint alien glow. For a heartbeat, she looked less like a woman and more like a weapon built for the silence between stars. He could almost hear the whisper of far-off engines, smell the metal tang of a ship's airlock opening to a vacuum. "You will be," she said, almost too quiet to hear. He stepped forward, closing the last inch of space between them and For a second, the tension cracked into something almost electric. Not attraction, challenge. His body told her what words didn't, that she wasn't the only dangerous thing in this room. Outside, far beyond the sealed walls, the station drifted in the cold void, unaware that two very different species had just begun a fight neither could afford to lose. Inside, the shadows waited, the hum of the seals a reminder that the world had been locked away for now. She wanted the data. He wanted to survive. One of them was going to get what they came for. Her hand didn't move from his chest, but the weight of it seemed to change. It wasn't strength she was pressing with, it was intent. The kind that could force a man to move backward without realizing he'd done it, but he didn't move. He let her feel the resistance, let her know that her touch wasn't going to guide him anywhere he didn't want to go. Her eyes shifted slightly, and he caught something there for just a second. Calculation. She was reading him the way a trained soldier reads a battlefield, searching for weak points, waiting for the moment he'd slip. But humans had a way of wearing their armor differently. Sometimes the weak points were exactly where you thought they'd be, and sometimes they were bait. He could feel the slow build of heat radiating from her, Not body heat, something else. The lines running over her skin pulsed in a sharper rhythm now, like the tempo of a countdown. His gaze followed the faint blue-white glow down her neck, over the curve of her shoulder, until it disappeared beneath the dark fabric wrapped tight around her. He didn't know if it was meant to distract him or intimidate him, but he knew enough about her species to realize those patterns weren't just decoration. They were conduits, weapons dot when she finally stepped back. It was slow and deliberate. The sound of her bare feet against the floor was almost too soft to hear, but each step felt like the tightening of a noose. She circled him once, hands clasped. Behind her back, eyes sliding over him as though cataloging the shape of his muscles, the balance of his stance, the readiness in his posture. "You hide it well," she said. "But your pulse says otherwise." He gave a half smile. "Maybe you're reading it wrong." Her gaze snapped to his, and for the first time, he thought he saw the faintest crack in that uncheckable alien composure. She didn't like being told she was wrong. Good. A faint tremor passed through the floor. Not much, just enough to notice if you were standing still. The station was shifting orbit, maybe adjusting for docking clearance. But it was enough to remind him of the reality beyond this locked chamber. Somewhere above them, bulkhead corridors stretched like veins. Crew members moved between decks. Security patrols passed. The compartment slid shut with a soft hiss, the wall smoothing itself back into seamless darkness as if it had never opened. The image of that black hexagonal object still hung in his mind like a fresh wound. It hadn't been there for him to take. It had been shown to him, deliberately. She wanted him to think about it, to picture it in his hands, to understand its weight without touching it. He didn't know exactly what it was, but he understood enough. Whatever that thing was, it was worth locking an entire section of the station down. Worth a Sherilyn operative breaking a dozen interstellar laws just by standing here. Worth killing over, and if it was worth killing over, it was worth defending. Eyes lingered on him longer than before, like she was measuring whether he'd already decided to try for it. He kept his expression steady. The trick wasn't to look uninterested, that would be obvious. The trick was to look like you could want something badly and still not make a move until the time was right. Humans had built empires on that kind. Of patience. "You think you can take it from me," she said, voice soft but sharp enough to cut. "I think I don't have to." Her markings brightened slightly, and she stepped closer again. "We'll see." The air shifted, not physically, but in the way it does just before something happens. She moved faster than most eyes could follow, a blur of pale skin and glowing lines. One moment she was in front of him, the next her hand was aimed at his throat. He blocked, barely. His forearm met hers with a thud, the vibration of impact. Running down his bones, she was stronger than she looked. Much stronger. Her other hand came in low toward his ribs, and he pivoted, letting it slide past. The motion brought them closer, the heat of her body almost distracting, but his focus didn't slip dodge. She was testing him, and not with words this time. He countered with a strike to her shoulder, not hard enough to injure, but enough to break her stance. She absorbed it like it was nothing, her eyes narrowing as if to say good. Her palm came around again, aimed higher, and this time he let it connect just enough to gauge her real speed. Fast, but not untouchable. Their movements blurred into a rhythm, block, strike, faint pivot. The sound of skin meeting skin, the faint scrape of bare feet against the floor, the soft rush of breath between exchanges. She never broke eye contact, and neither did he. It wasn't a fight yet. Not really. But it wasn't a dance either. When she finally pulled back, her breathing was steady, her face unreadable. But there was a flicker of something in her eyes. No, not frustration, not quite respect. Something else, like she was realizing this wasn't going to be as simple as she'd thought. "You're not like the others," she said. "Neither are you." A faint smile touched her lips. "Good. I'd hate for this to be easy." She moved toward the wall again, this time touching a different section. The surface rippled under her palm, and a slender blade slid free, its edge humming faintly with a vibration he could feel from where he stood. She tossed it lightly from hand to hand, the movement casual but loaded with meaning. "If you want to keep breathing," she said, "you'll need to earn it." The hum of the blade filled the silence, and for the first time since she'd locked the door, he realized he wasn't just here to survive, he was here to win. The blade's hum was low, almost soothing, but there was nothing gentle about the way she held it. The faint blue-white shimmer along its edge wasn't just for show. That was a microphase filament tuned to vibrate faster than most materials could resist. One wrong move and it wouldn't cut him. It would part him into clean, smoking halves. She twirled it once in her hand, slow, deliberate, making sure he saw every line of its design. Alien craftsmanship was always elegant, but this was different. It wasn't ceremonial. It wasn't a status symbol. This was made for killing, and for killing clean. She stepped closer. No sudden movement this time. Just slow, confident steps, like she knew exactly how this would end. He didn't move. He didn't even shift his stance. That was the first thing she noticed, the first mistake she made in assuming humans reacted the same way under threat as most species did. Most flinched, most blinked. Most gave away the moment they were about to try something desperate. Humans didn't. When she was within arm's reach, she tilted her head slightly, studying him like she was trying to see the decision forming in his mind. The glow along her markings pulsed in rhythm with her breathing, brighter now, more focused. She was ready for him to lunge, to try and disarm her, but he didn't. He waited. The silence grew heavy. Even the hum of the door seals seemed to fade into the background. He kept his eyes on hers, and that's when he saw it, the faintest twitch in her grip. Not weakness, not fear, but recognition. She was realizing he wasn't just another station drifter she could corner and strip for information, and that was when he moved. It wasn't a full strike, not yet. Just a shift of his weight, a pivot on the balls of his feet that let him step inside her reach. Her blade arm came up, but he caught her wrist before the strike could land, twisting it sharply enough to force her off balance. She was fast. Her other hand came for his ribs, but he caught that too, blocking with his forearm and driving forward, forcing her to take a step back. Her eyes widened slightly, and for the first time, the lines on her skin flared brighter without her meaning them to. She pushed back hard, wrenching her arm free, but the blade's hum was no longer steady. His grip had disrupted the filaments. Frequency. She glanced at it, and he saw the flicker of irritation in her gaze. "You're better than I thought," she said quietly. He didn't answer. He wasn't here to talk. They circled now, slower, more deliberate. She still had the blade, but her grip had changed, tighter, more defensive. She wasn't hunting anymore. She was watching, waiting. And he could feel it. The first crack in her control. He didn't press the advantage yet. That was another thing most species didn't understand about humans. Sometimes the most dangerous move wasn't striking when your opponent was vulnerable. It was letting them think they could recover, only to take it all away when they needed it most. Her breathing was still steady, but there was a sharpness to it now. Her steps were measured, but her eyes never left his. She was trying to read him, and the more she tried, the more he made sure there was nothing to read. This was no longer her game. For the first time since the door had locked, she wasn't sure who was in control. The flicker in her eyes was small, but he caught it, that split second of calculation where she decided the current game wasn't going to be enough. The grip on her blade shifted again, less about striking now and more about holding it like an extension of herself. Whatever she was planning, it wasn't just another feint. Her gaze slid to the far wall. Without a word, she touched the surface, and the air around them seemed to change. It wasn't a sound so much as a shift in pressure, like the moment before a storm when the air thickens and tastes faintly metallic. The shadows along the corners seemed to stretch, pulling deeper into black. Then the hum of the seals rose in pitch, and the light tracing the floor cut out completely. Darkness swallowed everything. No. Gradual dimming, just gone. For a moment there was nothing but silence, and then the faint pulse of her markings began to brighten. They weren't just glowing now. They were casting light, strands of bioluminescence crawling over her body like living circuitry. In the dark, it was mesmerizing, but it was also a warning. You've lasted longer than most, she said, her voice low and steady. Let's see if you last where they didn't. The floor shifted beneath him. No, not the floor, the whole room. The faint vibration he'd felt earlier now surged into a deep, rolling hum that resonated in his bones. His instincts screamed at him that they were moving, but the disorienting part was how. This wasn't the slow drift of a station-changing orbit. This was faster, more deliberate. He reached out to steady himself, but the wall wasn't where it should have been. He took a step and realized the room wasn't moving through the station. It was detaching from it. A faint seam of light split along the ceiling, and beyond it, he saw nothing but the black void of space. No stars, no station lights, just emptiness. And then it clicked. She dropped them into a cloaked launch capsule. Whatever came next wouldn't have an audience. You took us off the station, he said, his voice flat. I took you off. The station. The hum underfoot deepened again, and suddenly the floor jolted. Artificial gravity adjusted, sharper, heavier. She didn't stumble. Her kind was bred for this. He compensated, knees bending slightly, muscles tightening, keeping balance without giving her the satisfaction of seeing him slip. She moved in again, blade at her side, not attacking yet. Her steps were deliberate, slow enough to make him anticipate the strike that never came. Her eyes stayed locked on his face, reading every twitch of muscle, every shift in stance. You think you've taken away my escape, he said. Her smile was faint. You never had one. He let her believe that for half a heartbeat. Then he leaned forward slightly, voice low enough that she'd have to focus to hear it over the capsule's hum. You don't understand humans. You think locking us in a box makes us yours, but it doesn't work like that. You take away the exits, and all you've done is make us fight harder. Something in her gaze sharpened. Not fear, not yet, but curiosity mixed with a flicker of caution. The capsule gave another sharp lurch, and he used it. The shift in gravity threw both of them half a step off. The hum underfoot shifted pitch again, and his ears popped with the change in pressure. Whatever inertial dampeners the capsule had, they were running bare minimum now. She hadn't designed this trip for comfort. She wanted him aware of every jolt, every shudder, every reminder that there was no turning back. A final lurch rolled through the capsule, and then the weight lifted from his legs. Not zero gravity, but lighter, unsteady, like standing on a ship riding the edge of a storm swell. He glanced at her, and she was already moving toward the wall. Her palm pressed against an invisible seam, and it dissolved outward, folding away like liquid glass until the opening yawned wide. Beyond it was blackness. Not the clean, endless black of open space. This was different. Shapes moved in it, huge and slow, shadows against shadows. Their forms only visible when they blotted out faint streaks of dim starlight. The air that spilled in carried a faint, metallic tang, dry and cold enough to make his teeth ache. She stepped out without hesitation, bare feet finding footing on something that wasn't quite rock, wasn't quite metal, a surface that seemed to pulse faintly underfoot like it was alive. He followed. Not because he trusted her, but because staying in the capsule felt like the kind of mistake you only made once. The surface shifted slightly under his weight, almost testing his balance, but he adjusted quickly. They were standing on what looked like the hull of something massive, a ship, or maybe something older. The scale of it was impossible to take, and jagged spires rose around them like the broken teeth of some ancient predator, each one covered in the same dark, living metal texture that shifted under his boots. In the distance, beyond the faint haze of drifting particles, he could see movement, slow, deliberate, too large to be mechanical. "This place isn't on any chart," he said, scanning the horizon. "That's the point," she replied, voice steady. The faint glow of her markings reflected off the surface beneath them, and for a moment, he thought he saw the texture shifting to mirror her patterns. The idea that the ground was paying attention to her didn't sit well. He glanced back toward the capsule. The opening had already sealed itself, its surface smoothing over until it was indistinguishable from the rest of the structure. There would be no going back. A faint vibration ran through the surface, and she turned her head toward the horizon. "We don't have long. For what?" She looked at him, and for the first time, there was no smugness in her eyes. Just cold certainty for them to notice we're here. The air shifted again, a low, distant rumble carrying through the hull beneath their feet. He followed her gaze and saw it, one of the massive shapes in the distance turning toward them. No engines, no thrusters. It moved like a predator in water, slow but with the inevitability of something that didn't need speed to kill. She started walking fast, silent steps across the living metal surface. He followed, keeping his breathing even, but every sense was screaming now. The shape kept coming, and with every moment it became more distinct. Long, spined limbs. A segmented body that gleamed faintly in the starlight. Eyes, too many. Too bright, flaring open as it drew closer. "This is your test," she said without looking back. He didn't need to ask what she meant. Whatever was coming across the alien hull wasn't a puzzle to solve. It was a thing you survived or you didn't, and if this was her idea of a test, she was about to learn exactly why humans didn't break the way other species did. The room was so silent that even the hum of the ventilation felt like a shout. Rin pressed her back against the door, breath sharp and uneven, her eyes locking on him with a strange mix of fear and hunger. The way she moved slow, deliberate, made his pulse pound in his ears. Shadows from the flickering light stretched across her features, sharpening the ridges of her cheekbones, catching the strange metallic gleam in her skin. She stepped closer, the smell of something alien yet intoxicating lingering in the air between them. Her voice, low and almost trembling, broke the silence, telling him that once they began, there would be no undoing it. She was no ordinary alien her. Kind were hunted, studied, dissected in cold laboratories, their existence buried under classified archives. She had taken an enormous risk being here, and so had he. Her hand brushed his arm light as a whisper, and it was like static electricity running down his spine. She wasn't just touching him. She was marking him, staking a claim. The air felt too heavy to breathe, yet neither of them moved away. Every sound outside, the distant clang of metal, the occasional echo of boots on steel grating felt like a countdown they couldn't ignore. She leaned in close, her words hot against his ear, and told him the truth no one else dared speak. Humanity wasn't ready for what was coming, and neither was she, but together they might survive. In that instant, he realized it wasn't just lust or curiosity driving her. There was desperation, raw and unfiltered, the kind that made people cross lines they swore they'd never cross. Somewhere deep down, he knew this moment would decide everything: the mission, their survival, maybe even the fate of their worlds. And still, when she let her lips hover just a breath away from his, He didn't think about strategy or escape. Plans. He thought about how damn alive he felt right now, teetering on the edge of danger and desire, knowing one wrong move could shatter it all. The lights flickered again, and in that heartbeat of darkness, they both made their choice. The storm had long passed outside, but inside the safe house, the air was still thick with static and the smell of sweat, metal, and damp alien perfume. She stood near the shattered viewport, watching the rain's silver threads vanish into the neon mist, her silhouette framed by the flicker of faraway lightning. The hum of the room's failing generator pulsed like a heartbeat, and every so often the lights dimmed, throwing her face into shadow. She didn't flinch when Zorik approached. She didn't even turn her head. His boots clicked against the metal floor, each step slow and deliberate, carrying the weight of what they'd done. Outside, the city breathed in silence, its vast streets emptied by fear of patrols and the kind of disappearances no one dared ask about. In that stillness, their alliance felt both unshakable and fragile, a tightrope stretched over a black pit. He knew she wasn't looking at the rain. She was looking at the patrol's glinting drones weaving through the haze, scanning for heat signatures, hunting for the kind of trouble they had become. Somewhere just beyond those wet streets was a meeting point, a drop where the stolen data would pass hands if they lived to make it there. She finally turned, eyes holding a strange mix of weariness and fire, and her gaze drifted to the door. It wasn't locked anymore, yet neither of them made a move toward it. The danger wasn't out there. Not yet. It was in here, in the quiet. Knowledge that they had crossed a threshold there was no coming back from. The data they carried didn't just expose a secret, it dismantled a lie the entire sector was built on. And she knew as well as he did, if anyone learned they were still breathing, every hunter in the outer reach would come for them. A faint vibration rippled through the floor, the kind that spoke of incoming ships setting down on the districts. Edge. Their window was closing, and the night was about to turn bloody again. He-Floor's vibration deepened into a low, resonant growl, the kind that made loose bolts shiver in their sockets and sent fine dust raining from the ceiling's metal. Ribs. Zorik's instincts sharpened instantly. He'd felt that sound before. It wasn't the clumsy thud of civilian transports. It was the disciplined, perfectly synchronized landing of military craft. Chagathian. He exchanged a brief, wordless glance with her, and that was enough. Both knew what it meant. The Council wasn't sending search drones anymore. They had sent soldiers. He moved toward the table in the center of the room where a half-disassembled pulse rifle lay, its components scattered like bones waiting for a burial. His hands worked fast, piecing it together with muscle memory, while she crossed to the far wall and unlatched a hidden compartment, revealing a narrow case lined with glass vials and injector rigs. The liquid inside shimmered faintly in the dim light, a neural enhancer, dangerous but fast-acting. She popped the seal with her thumb, the hiss lost under the distant clank of ramp doors hitting wet concrete. "They're not here to negotiate," Zorik muttered, slamming the rifle's energy cell into place. "They never are," she replied, her voice flat but with an undertone of something darker anticipation. Maybe dot through the ruined viewport, shapes began to emerge from the rain. Tall, armored figures with mirrored visors, their steps in unison, weapons cradled with mechanical precision. The rain hissed against their suits, steam curling where the warm armor met the cold downpour. There were too many for a straight fight, and both knew it. This would have to be fast, loud, and messy enough to give them the seconds they needed. To slip away, Zorik took a breath and adjusted his grip on the rifle. She slid a vial into the injector and pressed it to her neck, eyes dilating as the chemical fire surged through her veins. The generator's flicker died entirely, plunging the room into darkness. Outside, the soldiers halted as if sensing the shift. Then, like the snap of a snare trap, the safe house door blew inward, and the night became a storm again, only this time the lightning came from inside. Her fingers lingered on his chest a second too long before pulling away, a silent reminder that whatever passed between them in that sealed room was not just accident or fear, but something both of them wanted, though for entirely different reasons. The air felt denser here, thick with the faint static hum of alien tech buried in the walls, each invisible current brushing his skin like the caress of unseen eyes. She stepped back only far enough to reach the wall panel, the dim blue illumination, painting her cheekbones sharp and dangerous. Somewhere beyond the bulkhead, the ship's systems murmured with alien life, the sounds shifting in subtle rhythms as if the entire vessel listened. He didn't like that. He didn't like how alive the place felt, or how easily it seemed to bend to her. This wasn't his domain. Human ships never breathed like this. Human tech was hard, sharp-edged, pragmatic. This thing was almost organic. It unsettled him to the marrow, but he refused to let her see that. Instead, he let his gaze wander the room's edges, noting every seam, every faint distortion in the wall, mapping the exits in his head like he'd done in every hostile bar, every war zone. Her eyes caught him doing it, and she smiled, small. And knowing, like she'd already guessed, he was playing a game of survival while she played one of seduction. "You're not here to admire the decor," she murmured, though her tone was more observation than question. She was right. He wasn't here for her walls or her games. He was here because she had whispered the one thing that no human in his position could ignore: no cameras, no witnesses. In this part of space, that meant the truth could breathe. That meant plans could be made that the rest of the galaxy didn't need to see coming. Still, he couldn't figure out why she'd chosen him for this. Why not one of her own kind? Why risk pulling a human into whatever dangerous web she wove? The council didn't just punish disobedience. They erased it, burned the memory of it from existence like it had never been. Yet here she was, inches from him, letting her body heat seep into the small space between them, trusting him or pretending to. He shifted closer without meaning to, the scent of her sharp, metallic, and faintly sweet hooking into him in ways that made it harder to think straight. "If you're planning to use me," he said, voice low, "just say it. Saves us both the act." Her gaze didn't waver. "Every alliance is a use, human. The question is whether we both survive it." The words were smooth, but he caught the flicker in her eyes, the brief hesitation that told him she wasn't entirely in control here either. That was something he could work with. A faint tremor rolled through the floor under their feet, subtle but unmistakable, the kind of shiver that meant something big had just shifted in the ship's systems. The lights dimmed, the hum of the walls lowering in pitch, and his instincts screamed trouble. She glanced toward the sealed door, her jaw tightening, and in that moment he knew whatever was happening out there wasn't part of her plan. He almost smiled. Humans thrived in chaos. She moved fast, crossing the room to a recessed panel, speaking in her own language, liquid, almost song-like, into some kind of embedded interface. The wall pulsed in reply, lines of alien script crawling like living things across the surface. He didn't wait to ask what it meant. He moved toward her, scanning over her shoulder, trying to pick out any pattern, any recognizable symbol. It was a mess of curves and branching forms, but one symbol kept repeating: a spiral intersected by 3 slashes. He burned it into memory. The floor trembled again, harder this time, and somewhere beyond the walls, a deep, resonant boom echoed through the hull. The ship wasn't just alive, it was reacting. Her fingers danced over the panel, urgency creeping into her movements, but she paused just long enough to glance at him again. "Stay close," she said. Not a plea, not a suggestion. An order dot, and then the wall behind her split open into a passage he hadn't known was there. Bleeding pale light and the promise of answers or more trouble into the room. The wind outside the shattered viewport howled like some distant god mourning a fallen child. But inside the command deck of the derelict station, the air was thick warm, heavy with recycled oxygen that tasted faintly metallic. Every surface bore the scars of recent chaos, gouges in the floor from dragged equipment, panels scorched from energy discharges, blood smears where people had fought and lost. The alien girl moved like a shadow through it all, her body low and deliberate, every step measured, her tail swaying slightly behind her in instinctive balance. Her eyes, large and luminous in the dim light, were fixed on the blinking holographic display ahead, the one still connected to the station's deep core. Databanks. The human followed close behind, his pulse pounding, his mind torn between awe and dread. The mission had stopped being about survival hours ago. It was now about understanding what they had stumbled into, about why the station's logs hinted at a presence older than the war, older than either of their species, when they reached the terminal. She stopped, her hand hovering over the projection controls. "Once I open this," she said quietly, her voice a blend of reverence and fear, "there's no going back." He nodded without hesitation, because somewhere deep inside, he felt the pull of destiny like a chain coiling tighter around his chest. She touched the panel, and the hologram flared to life. What bloomed before them wasn't text or standard navigational schematics. It was a moving three-dimensional lattice of light, a pulsating, shifting shape that seemed alive. It writhed and coiled in impossible geometries, its patterns flickering between colors the human's eyes could barely interpret. It was more than data, it was thought. A living fragment of something ancient, something alien and furious. The longer he looked at it, the more his mind recoiled. Hidden inside the shapes, his brain kept finding patterns, faces screaming in silence, skeletal structures of beings that could never exist, whole landscapes that defied reason. The alien girl's breathing quickened. Her pupils contracted to narrow slits, her claws digging into the console. She whispered something in her native tongue, the syllables sharp and trembling, and then turned to him with an expression he had never seen before, pure, unfiltered terror. "This," she said, "is the source, the thing that was here before the station, before my people, before yours." Before he could respond, the station itself seemed to shudder, not from mechanical strain, but like an animal reacting to a sudden threat. The lattice pulsed faster, and now it seemed to be reaching toward them, thin tendrils of light stretching out in slow, deliberate movements. The human took a step back, but the alien girl didn't move. She was transfixed, caught between fear and compulsion. "It knows we're here," she whispered, and for a moment, it felt like the entire galaxy had narrowed to this one room, to these two breathing creatures and the incomprehensible thing in front of them. The light tendrils brushed the air, and he could swear he felt them cold and electric sliding against his skin, trying to find a way in. The air pressure dropped slightly, and the sound of the wind outside was replaced by something worse. A low, pulsing hum, deep enough to be felt in the bones. That was when the alarms began to wail. Beneath the fractured ceiling of the derelict space station, the corridors seemed to stretch forever into shadows so deep they looked like they might swallow light whole. The alien girl's hand was still in his, firm yet trembling, her strange, bioluminescent skin casting a faint silver-green glow on the walls as they moved. Each footstep echoed against the metal, too loud for comfort, as if the darkness itself was listening. Somewhere far above, the groan of stressed steel rolled through the station's bones. The air was thick with the scent of rust, ozone, and something faintly sweet that didn't belong, an intoxicating reminder of her presence beside him. Her eyes flicked over her shoulder at every sound. sharp and predatory, but not in fear. It was as though she was measuring the distance to whatever hunted them, calculating if it was worth the effort to fight. Ahead, the corridor opened into a ruined maintenance bay littered with shattered drones and fractured loading crates, all dusted in a thin layer of frost despite the warmth of the air. She stopped suddenly, pressing him against the wall. Her body flushed to his as she tilted her head toward the ceiling. A low hum pulsed above, followed by the faint flicker of red scanning lights sweeping across the bay. The glow of her skin dimmed, instantly almost vanishing, and she pulled him closer, her breath warm against his ear. He realized then that her kind could control their bioluminescence, fading into near invisibility when they needed to hide. The scan passed, the hum faded, but she didn't move away. Instead, her grip tightened, the tension in her body thrumming through him. When she finally spoke, it was almost too soft to hear. "We're close." The way she said it made his chest tighten, not with fear, but with a dangerous kind of anticipation. She led him deeper into the bay, weaving through the debris until they reached a sealed hatch covered in alien symbols carved so deep they looked like wounds in the metal. She traced them with her fingertips, and he swore the marks pulsed faintly. Under her touch, the lock disengaged with a hiss that was too organic to be machinery dot inside. The air was warmer, wetter, almost alive. The walls glistened with a faint iridescence, and beneath their feet, the floor pulsed with a rhythm like a heartbeat. He realized this wasn't just a hidden room, it was part of something living. She moved with reverence, like someone entering a sacred place, and he followed, every nerve screaming that once he crossed this threshold, there would be no going back. Somewhere in the pulsing dark ahead, something shifted, and he had the sinking realization that whatever they were running from might not be the worst thing on this station. Do you want me to push the next part into a more dangerously intimate yet still tense tone so the hooks stay sharp? The chambers. Hum deepened, vibrating through bones and nerves, a sound that wasn't just heard but felt. The alien girl's expression shifted fear, now tempered with resolve. Her irises dilated, swallowing the color until her gaze was nearly black, reflecting only the glimmers of the machinery. She stepped toward the central pillar, each movement measured, the silence around them heavy enough to feel like an atmosphere of its own. The walls shifted again, reconfiguring in spirals, showing flashes of alien cities beneath glass oceans, forests made of living crystal, stars blinking out one by one like dying embers. It wasn't a display, it was a warning, and the girl's quick, shallow breath told him she knew exactly what it meant. The floor beneath them vibrated harder, shifting like something alive, the plates parting to reveal a slow swirl of silver liquid that pulsed with a heartbeat rhythm. His instincts screamed that touching it would be the end of him, yet the girl reached down, letting a droplet cling to her fingertips. The metal reacted instantly, stretching into a filament that climbed her hand and wrapped around her wrist. Like a living bracelet, the machinery responded, an unseen lock releasing somewhere deep in the structure. A voice, low and layered, rolled through the room, its words impossible to translate, yet the meaning burned into the mind, an invitation. And a threat, coiled together like a serpent, the images flashing across the chamber grew sharper, more violent. Ships tearing each other apart in the void, hulking war machines grinding over the remains of cities, suns flaring and collapsing. In every vision, the same shadow loomed vast, segmented, and coldly patient. The girl's eyes locked on him, and in that moment he understood. She wasn't here to save her world. She was here to end something before it could reach his. The stakes shifted in an instant, far beyond survival, beyond even revenge. This was about pruning the tree of existence before the infection spread too far. Something slammed against the chamber from outside, the walls flexing inward, not from an explosion, but from pressure, something immense pushing its way in. A fissure cracked along the far wall, spilling an unnatural light into the room. It wasn't just bright, it was wrong, a color that stabbed into the brain and left a metallic taste on the tongue. The girl jerked her head toward the fissure, her jaw tightening. She spoke one word in her own language, a sound like a chord, plucked from a string made of glass, and the bracelet on her arm tightened. The silver liquid surged up her arm, curling across her shoulder and chest in a pattern that seemed older than stars themselves. He knew, without knowing how, that whatever was coming through that crack wasn't going to stop until it had them. Both. The girl's posture told him she was ready to fight, but something in her stance made it clear. She didn't expect to survive. He stepped toward her without hesitation, the floor vibrating harder underfoot, the hum now a roar. If they were going to die here, it wouldn't be as prey. It would be as predators. The fissure widened, and the first shadow slipped through. The final chamber lay before them, a vast, cathedral-like expanse carved into the very marrow of the station's structure, walls etched with ancient alien glyphs that pulsed and synchronized. Rhythm with Ava's heartbeat. The air here was different, thicker, heavier, almost sentient, every inhalation carrying the weight of countless unspoken secrets. The ground beneath their feet seemed alive, faint ripples passing through its surface as though they walked across the skin of some titanic slumbering beast. At the chamber's heart stood a monolithic pillar of glassy black crystal, impossibly tall, vanishing into the dark canopy above. Its surface shot through with streams of light that shifted like liquid galaxies. Liam felt his pulse sink to its glow, each beat an echo of something vast and incomprehensible. Ava stepped forward, her fingers grazing its surface, and at her touch the crystal shuddered, emitting a low, resonant tone that vibrated deep in their bones. Around them, the walls shifted, glyphs twisting, rearranging, becoming something closer to human symbols, as if the station itself were rewriting its own language to be understood. From the shadows, vast constructs began to emerge, towering. Biomechanical guardians with limbs like flowing metal and eyes like molten suns, their presence radiating the kind of cold inevitability reserved for laws of physics. Liam's instincts screamed at him to run, but his body refused. Transfixed by the sheer alien majesty of what stood before them, Ava didn't flinch. She stepped into the open, her voice steady but almost tender as she addressed the Titans. The sound that followed wasn't words. Not in the human sense, it was something felt rather than heard. A braided stream of intention, emotion, and ancient authority that made Liam's knees buckle. The guardians halted, their molten eyes dimming to a smolder, and the chamber seemed to lean in, listening. Ava turned her gaze to Liam, and for the first time he realized the full scope of what she was, something not born of Earth or this station, but of a place where thought and matter were one, where entire civilizations lived and died in the span of a single breath. She told him, not with words, but with the weight of truth itself, that this was not the end, but the ignition, the moment humanity would either rise to meet the vastness beyond or be swept aside by it. The crystal pulsed brighter, and the air, filled with the electric scent of ozone and stars. A choice was unfolding, one that would rewrite the trajectory of human history. Liam felt it then, the undeniable, almost terrifying certainty that they were no longer intruders in this place. They were participants. The station's hum deepened to a thunderous chord. The guardians stepped aside, and the crystal began to open, revealing within it something that burned with the impossible light of a newborn sun. Ava reached for his hand, her grip warm, grounding, and without hesitation they stepped forward together, vanishing into the brilliance as the chamber sealed behind them, leaving the rest of the galaxy blind to what had just begun.